price of words. Hello and welcome to this night's voyage across time. Tonight, we'll reveal another leaf of history and attend closely to the echoes it left behind. Perhaps you're resting in bed, phone glow softened, or perhaps you've merely elected to let history accompany you for a spell. Before we plunge into this captivating yet severe reality, I'd adored to discover where you're tuning in from tonight. Are you preparing for slumber in New York, launching your dawn in Tokyo, or maybe relishing a hushed dusk somewhere in between? Leave a remark and inform me what hour it is in your slice of the globe. And if you uncover these investigations of antique societies as spellbinding as I do, contemplate subscribing so you never overlook an installment. Now, permit me to carry you to the shores of the Nile, where the dawn star casts lengthy silhouettes across mud-brick structures, and the breeze saturates with the noises of a society stirring. The tender lapping of the stream blends with the remote cries of sellers and the hushed scrape of sandaled feet on dusty trails. In this realm of rulers and pyramids, sanctuaries and graves, there dwelled the group of males whose existences were described by reed pens and papyrus rolls. These were the writers, the guardians of understanding, the chroniclers of the past, the vital gears in the enormous machinery of Egyptian culture. Yet their survival was distant from the romanticized picture we might imagine today. The journey to becoming a writer started early, frequently when a lad was scarcely more than 5 or 6 years old. Households of humble resources perceived schooling as their offspring, as sole exit from a lifetime of grueling bodily toil. They would scrape together what little they possessed to dispatch their sons to writer academies. Understanding entirely the trial that anticipated them, envision youthful Ket, whose parent was a minor shrine officer in Memphis. At daybreak, while other youngsters frolicked by the Nile's brink, catching fish with their naked palms, or aiding their mothers grind cereal, Ket would journey to the dwelling of life connected to the district shrine. His belly often vacant, his feet bare against the cool dawn stones, he conveyed his valuable writing substances, a palette, red pens, and fragments of shattered pottery termed ostraka for exercise. The academy head, a rigid man whose own palms bore the lasting marks of ebony and scarlet ink, would salute the pupils with neither kindness nor support. Learning in antique Egypt was not about fostering youthful intellects, but about hammering facts into them via unyielding recurrence and severe discipline. The initial lesson each hopeful writer absorbed was agonizing in the most literal sense. The hieroglyphic arrangement encompassed over 700 signs, each with its own significance, sound, or mixture of both. Learners were compelled to memorize these symbols flawlessly, and any blunder was met with rapid. The instructor's cane fashioned from river reed would snap across knuckles, backs, and shoulders with startling regularity. A lad's hearing organ is upon his rear, went an antique Egyptian proverb. This outlook saturated every facet of scribal learning. Young Ket would expend hours each day replicating the identical symbols repeatedly, his hands seizing around the reed pen, his sight straining in the faint glow of the academy chamber. The writing plane itself offered perpetual tests. Papyrus crafted from the papyrus flora that flourished plentifully along the Nile was costly and kept for vital records. Learners drilled on ostraka, fractured bits of pottery or limestone that were coarse and unsmooth. The exterior would snag and tear at the fragile reed pens, causing ink to splatter and symbols to blur. But the bodily distress was merely the start. The cerebral strain of mastering hieroglyphs was tremendous. Unlike our alphabet with its 26 characters, the Egyptian writing method mandated learners grasp hundreds of symbols, comprehend their diverse meanings reliant on context, and dominate the intricate regulations that directed their application. Certain symbols denoted noises, others, entire expressions or notions. The identical symbol might signify distinct concepts in diverse contexts, and the bearing of writing could alter from text to text. A student had to identify this symbol, whether it pointed left or right, whether it materialized at the start, middle, or conclusion of an expression, and whether it was carved in rock, colored on a barrier, or rapidly scribbled on papyrus. Multiply this intricacy by hundreds of symbols, and you start to grasp the monumental assignment confronting these youthful intellects. The syllabus stretched considerably past mere sign acknowledgement. Writers required to be mathematicians, computing levies, gauging terrain, and monitoring the elaborate Egyptian schedule. They scrutinized literature, duplicating classic manuscripts until they could recount them from recollection. They absorbed holy hymns and ceremonial methods, for many would labor in shrines throughout their vocations. Geography was vital, as writers needed to know the titles and places of Egypt, its numerous nomes or regions, its metropolises and sanctuaries, its commerce paths and administrative hubs. They scrutinized the inundation designs of the Nile, the farming schedule, and the complex net of statutes that governed Egyptian civilization. Hunched day commenced before sunrise and concluded long after sunset. His hands were perpetually tinted with ink, his fingertips cracked and oozing from clutching the reed pens for hours on end. His rear ached from stooping over his labor, and his sight scorched from the strain of shaping tiny, exact symbols by the radiance of oil lamps. The mental strain was persistent. Rivalry among pupils was intense, as merely the most adept would progress to esteemed posts in the imperial management or affluent shrine. Those who faltered encountered a lifetime of menial copying labor, or worse, a return to the bodily toil their families had surrendered so much to aid them escape. The academy had displayed no kindness to floundering pupils. Ancient Egyptian manuscripts speak of pupils being thrashed until they bled, confined in dim chambers and exposed to public embarrassment. Yet the beating continued day after day, year after year. Nourishment was sparse in the academies. Pupils often went famished, their families incapable to supply sufficient meals, while also compensating for their schooling. Liquid was rationed and ailment was prevalent in the packed, inadequately aired chambers where dozens of youths clustered over their work. Numerous pupils endured from vision complications due to the perpetual strain of intricate labor in weak lighting. The societal seclusion was perhaps equally hard. While other youngsters played and created friendships, aspiring writers expended their days in stillness, barred from conversing during lessons. They were parted from their families for months at a period, dwelling in dormitories linked to the academies. The bonds they created with fellow pupils were frequently strained by rivalry and the mutual trauma of their education. After 5 to 10 years of this taxing instruction, those who endured surfaced as certified writers, but their adversities were far from concluded. The working existence of a writer delivered its own special array of tests and distresses. Most writers discovered employment in one of 3 chief zones: government management, shrine complexes, or private homes of the prosperous. Each location delivered its own particular form of misery. Government writers encountered perhaps the most exacting circumstances. They were accountable for the enormous administration that sustained the Egyptian nation operating. Levy compilation alone necessitated an army of writers to log each kernel of wheat, each head of livestock, each fragment of silver that streamed into the imperial treasury. Picture Ammon Hotep, presently a mature male who had endured his scribal preparation and secured a position in the levy bureau of a provincial capital. His day started before sunrise with the advent of cultivators conveying their tribute to the district administrator. Each deal had to be chronicled in one duplicate for the local archives, one for the provincial governor, and one for the imperial records in the capital. The labor was mind-numbingly recurring yet necessitated utter precision. A lone mistake in computation could lead to harsh punishment, not merely for Ammon Hotep, but for his entire household. Levy writers were held personally accountable for any inconsistencies in their records, and suspected deception was penalized by beatings, captivity, or even fatality. The tension was persistent and unrelenting. Throughout harvest season, Ammon Hotep might labor 18 hours a day, his hand cramping around his pen as he chronicled interminable inventories of serial consignments. His sight would burn from peering at digits in flickering lamp glow, and his rear would ache from bending over papyrus scrolls. But the bodily demands were insignificant compared to the sentimental toll. Levy compilation in antique Egypt was frequently a ruthless affair. Farmers who couldn't fulfill their quotas encountered harsh punishment, beatings, incarceration, or confiscation of their possessions. Ammon Hotep was compelled to observe and document these severe actions, recording the tears and appeals of families being torn asunder by the demands of the state. The antique manuscripts speak of Levy writers being endangered and assaulted by hopeless cultivators. Some were slain in riots when harvest collapsed and quotas couldn't be met. Others encountered the perpetual anxiety of knowing that their own errors could lead to false allegations against blameless individuals. Shrine writers encountered distinct but equally testing circumstances. The Holy Order of Antique Egypt was intricate and unsparing, with rigid protocols governing every facet of shrine existence. Writers laboring in these consecrated areas had to dominate not merely the technical facets of writing, but also the complex holy awareness needed for their tasks. Consider Pete, who functioned as a writer in the Grand Shrine of Karnak. His obligations encompassed documenting holy ceremonies, preserving shrine accounts, duplicating sacred and preparing the elaborate papers required for holy festivities. Each assignment demanded flawlessness, for any mistake in a sacred manuscript was deemed not merely an error, but a sacrilege that could enrage the divinities. The laboring circumstances in shrines were frequently severe. Many writers toiled in dim, confined scriptorium chambers deep inside the shrine complexes. The air was thick with incense and powder from disintegrating papyrus scrolls. The perpetual holy ceremonies generated a clamor of chanting, drumming, and ceremonial actions that rendered focus problematic. Holy writers were also subject to the shrine's stringent purity necessities. They had to experience regular purification rites, uphold particular dietary limitations, and abstain from specific actions that were deemed defiling. Their personal lives were intensely regulated, and any breach of holy statute could lead to instant expulsion or worse. The duplication of sacred manuscripts was especially demanding labor. These papers had to be impeccable, with every sign correctly shaped and every term utterly accurate. A solitary mistake might necessitate commencing an entire manuscript anew, signifying days or weeks of squandered exertion. The stress to accomplish perfection while laboring rapidly enough to meet deadlines generated a continuous condition of apprehension. Private household writers, while perhaps experiencing marginally enhanced laboring circumstances, encountered their own special tests. They were entirely reliant on the whims of their masters, with no employment safety and minimal lawful safeguard. A writer who displeased his employer might discover himself released, without caution, compelled to seek fresh work in a cutthroat marketplace. These writers frequently discovered themselves trapped between conflicting demands. They might be requested to falsify archives to aid their masters, evade levies, or to counterfeit papers for diverse schemes. Refusing such requests could signify forfeiting their post, but complying could lead to grave lawful repercussions if the trickery was uncovered. The solitude of private duty was also challenging. Unlike government or shrine writers who labored alongside colleagues, household writers frequently toiled alone with scant societal interaction or expert backing. They were neither servants nor household members, inhabiting an uneasy middle rank in the home order. Regardless of where they labored, all writers encountered mutual tests that rendered their occupation especially severe. The instruments of their craft were primitive and demanding. Reed pens had to be incessantly resharpened, necessitating the writer to halt frequently to trim the point with a blade. The pens would split or fracture entirely, occasionally midway through vital papers. Ink was readied fresh each day by blending liquid with blocks of dried pigment. The density had to be flawless. Excessively thick, and it wouldn't flow correctly. Excessively thin, and it would spread and blur. Scarlet ink was utilized for headings and vital segments, necessitating writers to sustain two distinct ink reserves and recall when to shift between them. Papyrus, despite being Egypt's grandest contribution to the progress of writing, was distant from an optimal writing plane. It was costly, delicate, and prone to tearing. The filaments flowed in particular directions, and writing counter to the grain could induce the pen to snag and tear the surface. In humid circumstances, papyrus would grow soft and hard to write on. In arid circumstances, it would grow brittle and fracture. The laboring atmosphere was frequently hostile to both writer and substances. Dust was a perpetual issue, settling on moist ink and spoiling painstakingly readied papers. Insects would swarm around oil lamps, periodically alighting on fresh writing and leaving imprints that couldn't be erased. The smoke from lamps generated eye aggravation and breathing complications for writers who labored extended hours in inadequately aired areas. Ergonomics was not a concept recognized to antique Egyptians. Writers usually labored seated cross-legged on the terrain or on low stools, bent over their work with their papyrus spread on their lap or on a low table. This stance, preserved for hours at a time, induced severe rear discomfort, neck tension, and circulation issues. The recurring motion of writing with reed pens led to what we would now identify as recurring stress injuries. Writers commonly endured from arthritis in their hands and wrists, ailments that deteriorated with age and could eventually render writing unfeasible. Many antique Egyptian mummies of writers display distinct proof of these occupational harms. Eye strain was another perpetual issue. The intricate labor of shaping tiny hieroglyphic symbols, frequently by lamp glow, extracted a dreadful toll on writers' vision. Many elder writers endured from what antique manuscripts depict as dimness of vision, probably a blend of nearsightedness and other vision complications induced by their labor. The mental tension of the occupation was equally damaging. Writers carried immense accountability for precision in their labor. The mental tension of the occupation was equally damaging. Writers carried immense accountability for precision in their labor. Government writers knew that mistakes in levy archives, or lawful papers, could have severe consequences for both themselves and the individuals impacted by their blunders. The perpetual stress to perform perfectly while laboring at velocity generated anxiety and stress-linked wellness complications. Rivalry among writers was intense and frequently ruinous. Positions in the imperial management or prosperous shrines were intensely desired, and writers would sporadically sabotage their colleagues' labor or false accusations to progress their own professions. The occupation fostered suspicion and paranoia as writers learned to safeguard their methods and contacts jealously. The societal rank of writers was intricate and frequently exasperating. While they were technically part of the educated elite and exempted from bodily toil, they were still considerably beneath the nobles and priests in the societal order. They were educated sufficiently to comprehend their comparatively low rank, but not influential enough to alter it. Many writers expended their entire professions in intermediate-level positions, never progressing to the elevated administrative duties they had envisioned as pupils. They observed as less qualified persons with superior household ties or political abilities progressed past them. The blend of schooling and restricted chance generated a group of resentful, annoyed individuals who grasped the arrangement sufficiently to perceive its injustices, but were powerless to alter them. The financial truth of a writer's existence was frequently severe. While they gained more than bodily laborers, the expense of their schooling and the outlay of sustaining their expert substances left many writers battling financially. They had to acquire their own papyrus, ink, and writing implements, expenses that could consume a substantial portion of their earnings. Vocational obsolescence was a perpetual dread as administrative methods altered or fresh technologies were presented. Writers had to incessantly revise their abilities or risk becoming unemployable. Those who specialized in specific kinds of papers or labored in particular administrative zones might discover their proficiency abruptly worthless due to political or administrative shifts. The occupation also carried substantial lawful hazards. Writers who committed mistakes in lawful papers could be held responsible for any ensuing harms. Those who labored in levy compilation encountered personal accountability for any deficits in revenue. Government writers could be accused of corruption or treachery founded on the papers they readied, even if they were merely obeying directives from superiors. Wellness perils extended past the evident ergonomic and vision complications. The substances utilized in scribal labor presented their own threats. Certain inks encompassed harmful elements that could induce wellness complications through prolonged contact. The powder from grinding pigments and preparing writing substances induced breathing issues. The substandard air purity in numerous laboring environments led to lung complications and other wellness difficulties. Societal solitude was another substantial test. The demanding essence of scribal labor left minimal time for household existence or societal bonds. Many writers labored extended hours 6 days a week, with merely holy festivities offering respites from their labors. The combative essence of the occupation rendered it challenging to create authentic friendships with colleagues. The mental effect of the labor itself was considerable. Many writers expended their days chronicling human anguish, levy compilations that impoverished households, lawful proceedings that wrecked existences, or administrative choices that impacted entire communities. The perpetual contact of the severe realities of Egyptian civilization extracted a sentimental toll that few other occupations underwent. Despite these hardships, Egyptian civilization generated thousands of writers over the millennia. The occupation was vital to the operation of one of history's most intricate civilizations. These males surrendered their wellness, their youth, and frequently their contentment to preserve the archives that permitted Egypt to prosper for over 3,000 years. The instruction they endured, severe as it was, generated individuals adept of amazing cerebral accomplishments. They dominated multiple writing arrangements, executed intricate mathematical computations, and preserved meticulous archives of unmatched scope and precision. Their labor empowered the building of the pyramids, the management of an enormous realm, and the preservation of one of humanity's grandest literary customs. Yet, the human cost was enormous. The antique manuscripts speak of writers who perished young from overwork, who went sightless from eye tension, or who endured mental breakdowns from the perpetual stress. Many never wedded or had households, dedicating their entire existences to their demanding occupation. The Egyptian writer was trapped in a basic inconsistency. His schooling and abilities marked him as a member of the elite, yet his laboring circumstances and treatment frequently mirrored those of a slave. He was vital to the operation of society, yet remained susceptible to the whims of his superiors. He owned awareness and abilities that others envied, yet inhabited a lifetime of perpetual hardship and tension. As we contemplate the existence of the antique Egyptian writer, we acquire perception into the genuine cost of civilization. The magnificent monuments and accomplishments of antique Egypt were constructed not merely on the backs of bodily laborers, but also on the surrender of these educated males who surrendered their existences to sustaining the intricate administrative arrangements that rendered such accomplishments feasible. Their tale reminds us that literacy and schooling, which we frequently take for granted, arrived at an enormous price for those who initially mastered these abilities. The subsequent occasion you effortlessly key a message or scribble a memo recall Ket Ammon Hotep, and Pete, and the innumerable others who suffered years of agony and hardship to master the craft of writing, that we now employ without a second contemplation. In the shade of the pyramids, in the cool chambers of shrines, and in the active offices of antique administrators, these writers lived and labored and suffered. Their personal names may be misplaced to history, but their collective donation to human civilization is immeasurable. They were the guardians of awareness, the chroniclers of history, and the unheralded champions who aided transform humanity from an oral society to a literate one. The severe reality of their existences stands as a witness to the devotion and surrender needed to advance human awareness and preserve it for future generations.